Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 15 of Demand Decoded. Thanks for tuning in and for taking the time to join us as always. Today I'm flying solo. My regular co-host Dan is on well-deserved vacation. And so today I'm talking about how to craft the perfect homepage for your B2B website. Homepages are pretty important pages after all. So they're often the single most visited page on your website, certainly when you exclude content and PPC landing pages and the like. And the majority of visitors are, in many cases, new. So they're at the beginning of a very important journey on your website. And for many of your potential customers, they can make or break the experience they have, which ultimately determines, what your end result looks like in terms of conversion. So it's a very interesting topic that we always take great pleasure in exploring. So when it comes to home pages, who are we talking about in the first place? Because of course, marketing advice isn't all universal. And I'm talking today about homepage design for B2B companies, with typically technical products, services, or solutions who want their website to be a source of high intent inquiries. Predominantly, that's the audience for which this advice applies. And a lot of what works in that context will apply universally, but there may be specific situations, specific markets or scenarios, where data can demonstrate that an alternative approach works. But, I'm not considering those exceptions today, talking very much about creating pipeline and demand through your B2B website for your product, service, or solution. And it's a very important moment when a buyer arrives on your homepage, because to my mind, that visitor is usually in a state of quite interesting tension. They're looking for the right site on which to spend their time and on which to convert and potentially go on to buy the solution that's offered. But at the same time, they're on the defensive. They're protecting their time and their data and looking to avoid wasting it or giving it away when there isn't a mutual benefit or reward on offer. So it's a really interesting moment in the journey where they're both open to what you have to offer, but also very ready to quickly abandon and go elsewhere. So in the context of that tension, we've seen over the years that there's a number of things that consistently and continually work well. And that's predominantly, I think, because human behavior in terms of how we interact with the web is relatively slow changing. There are small aspects that have shifted, but ultimately the way we operate our devices and the way that we engage with websites, that's not in a state of rapid change. There's a lot of UX truths and buyer behavior truths that have held true for quite some time now. And there's a whole host of other things that, no matter how attractive they may seem and how desirable they may appear, sadly, they're nearly always going to negatively impact that performance. So there's nothing you can do to make a buyer more receptive or responsive to certain things that I think are nevertheless, common to see on B2B websites, common requests of stakeholders or ideas that we have. So really, it's a process of fine-tuning the website to filter out those nice to haves that are going to negatively impact your performance, and adopting some, if not all, of the best practices that we'll talk about today that can really, increase the engagement and the conversion rate of your homepage and therefore of your whole website. Because buyers are in that moment of tension, they're looking to very quickly decide whether this is the right website for them or not. This is why you've really only got mere seconds when a visitor arrives to pass what's sometimes called the blink test, during which they instantly judge the value of your site to them at that moment in time, and they decide whether to leave or whether to stay. And so you've got a very short period of time and very few words and very few parts of your design with which to make a good first impression. And in fact, you need to make a great first impression if you're going to get a buyer to stay on your site, spend their valuable time there, and not leave instantly to look for something that's more, quickly going to provide the value they're looking for. So you've got to make a great first impression. And even if you do make a great first impression and pass the blink test, there's still an uphill climb in front of you to build the credibility and the trust that leads them to explore the site further, take the navigation options and the signposts that you lay out for them, and even go so far as to convert. So there's a lot more to do once you're past that critical first moment. And I think Nielsen Norman had a statement which rings true, and it's kind of a universally applicable statement in the context of homepage design, which is, they say, don't assume, design for new visitors too. And one of the traps that I think applies throughout what we're going to talk about today in terms of homepage design is falling foul of forgetting who your website is for, it being for your buyer and not for yourself or your internal stakeholders or team. And more than that, it's actually often for people who have not visited your website before, don't know a whole lot about you, are not familiar with your brand, your proposition, or your offering. And so it's a mistake to design the site around people that you suspect might be repeat visitors or might have high levels of familiarity. Even if demand generation activity and awareness creation is going really well, when visitors first arrive, often they're in a state of net new knowledge. They know nothing really about your solution and what you offer, and they're there to learn it. So we've got to target those first-time visitors for the best results. So what does your homepage need to include in order to perform as well as it can in terms of overcoming these challenges? Passing the blink test, building the credibility and the trust that leads to a prolonged visit, or a conversion action into a high intent, qualified bottom of the funnel lead. Well, there's 4 key things, and we'll go through each one now. Number 1, of course, is your value proposition. It's so important to get this part right because it is the cornerstone of everything else that comes along later. It's how you get past the blink test. It's how you set up the visit for building that credibility and trust. And it's imperative to the buyer's experience of your website. And, value proposition is, of course, ultimately, why should a visitor buy from you? And there's a few things that go into creating an effective value proposition. The most basic way to describe it is to say that your value proposition combines what you do, what you offer, who you do it for, what problem you solve, and to some degree, how that's different from other available solutions, although that can't always necessarily be fit into the first opening salvo of content, or the short passage that they see. You might have to use more of your homepage to convey all of those points. The most important thing by far is to remember to communicate it clearly. It's so harmful when overly creative or obfuscatory language or buzzwords or strap lines get used in place of clear and concise value proposition. These first-time visitors that are arriving, looking to make a very quick decision about whether they're going to stay on this site, really don't have time to decode an overly complex or opaque message about value proposition. As mentioned, they want to know, what do you do? Who is it for? And what problem does it solve? And the quicker and more clearly you can communicate that on your website, the more of the right kind of visitor and the right kind of buyer will stay to explore. There's a positive upside to getting really clear about your value proposition, in that often that will naturally contain a keyword that describes your product that is also the one that buyers use when they search. And of course, that's going to make it far easier to rank for an attractive commercial keyword that buyers use to find solutions like yours. And that does no harm at all, of course. That being said, in marketing, there do have to be compromises sometimes. And I think getting your true value proposition across clearly is more important marginally than fitting in a attractive, relevant keyword to your website's, homepage headline, for example, because you'll likely have other pages that act as, good landing pages for commercial keywords. You'll also have content and pillar pages, driving in traffic around a range of attractive keywords. So it's not a critical point, but it's worth bearing in mind that a clear value proposition statement in many cases contains the keyword that buyers use to describe your solution. And if it does, that's going to give you better results. Now, when it comes to the value proposition, we've talked about how it's a key method for getting past the blink test. And that kind of necessitates that it occupies the header section of your homepage, the first part that loads and the first part that's seen, because that's the only part they're going to see in the few seconds that they give you to win their engagement, if you like. And with that in mind, it's really the reason why it's inadvisable in the majority of cases to use that valuable header section for anything else. As I've mentioned, when you look at your analytics, you'll most likely see the majority of visitors are in fact new visitors, and even the returning ones are probably more interested in understanding your proposition from a purchase point of view. It's only in certain special cases, I think, where return visitors are coming back to consume new content about your company. So it's inadvisable in most cases to use the header section, for example, for your latest news or content publications. Although I will say that there are situations where that may prove to be the right approach. If it's about generating pipeline and getting new people to understand and prefer and trust you, then lead with your value proposition and use your header for that, and that alone. In the same vein, it's important, as we've talked about today and on previous episodes of this show, that you get the proposition across clearly and quickly. And to that end, motion basically is a no-no. And you'll have heard me say that sliders are bad. They are bad. Sliders, scrolling text, and even video headers, truth be told, any form of motion is most likely going to detract from a visitor's ability to consume and comprehend the important statements that are being made. So static presentation of those important messages is nearly always going to perform best at getting people to stay and explore and convert. And as much as we would like our snazzy video header or our scrolling text concept to fly, truth is it's going to harm us most likely. By all means, test it, but typically we see that in B2B, the static presentation works. Now, you need images alongside your value proposition too, of course, and the reality there is that in most cases, people want to see your product if it's possible to show it. So, if you're selling software, then there's nothing better to show than the software itself in that header section. It builds trust and credibility faster than anything else. Complex software solutions can be abstracted, but I think you've got to be wary that your abstraction doesn't drift too far from the reality, because everybody's skeptical and nobody wants there to be a big difference between the expectation that they saw on the website and the reality that they experience when they convert or take a demo or buy the software or start using it. So abstract UIs need to be considered carefully so that they're not too far removed from the real product. Beyond that, you can use illustrations to articulate your proposition if it's a service or if it's a solution. But don't make it overcomplicated, because again, we've got very limited cognitive, load available to us when buyers come to the website. We want to make it simple for them to understand and comprehend what our proposition is. So simple, clear, concise value proposition statements that convey what you offer, who it's for, what problem it solves, and the product or the service on offer, visualized, is a great way to start. And if you do that, you've got the highest possible chance of passing the blink test and the visitor, either looking down to the next section or scrolling down to the next section of your page. which moves us on to one of the second most important elements for your B2B website homepage, which is proof and evidence. It's well known that proof, sometimes referred to as social proof, the evidence that other people trust and use your solution or offering, is a really powerful signal to new prospective buyers. So when visitors arrive on your website and they see either logos that you work with, testimonials, quotes, reviews, or case studies, it's going to be helpful in building the trust and credibility that they need to convert. So it's a really good idea to ensure your homepage features this. There is a wide range of ways that you can deliver this to your visitor. And in reality, it's probably worth considering using a variety of them throughout the page and the site. So it's not unusual to see a strip of logos, shortly after a header section. And I think that's a good thing to consider because it quickly gets across, a key point. You're used by brands that either in the relevant sector or the relevant geography, or with the, credibility that gives you confers the credibility and trust onto your brand. Really good idea to try and go further than saying trusted by, because there again is a certain skepticism, I think, that exists, which is sometimes when we look at websites and we see the logos that are on them, we stop and wonder, what capacity they're using them in. Are they really clients of this business now, or was it in the past? There's some doubt that is brought along with logos. So I think a clearer header that states who in the business or what context within the business the solution is used in can really up the credibility and the trust that's developed from that strip of logos. But it's worth considering too how and where you can use either actual reviews, that 5-star reviews or very high scoring reviews from platforms like Trustpilot and so on, and other systems, and even ones you've received, directly, can be a really powerful signal too. So those could go alongside your logos or in place of them. But it's also really interesting to explore using those snippets of content, those testimonials, to support claims that you're making throughout the page. So we'll be moving on to the next sections of content of the page in a moment, but a testimonial or a review or a short comment from a really credible business alongside that supports a claim that you're making alongside it can be a really valuable way to use that proof that you have, that evidence that you have, put it in context of the feature, and people will trust it even more. There's a slightly separate topic, which is putting trust signals, putting proof and evidence, particularly testimonials, alongside bottom of the funnel conversion forms and the like, can be a really powerful way to get more people to take that final step. Not the subject for today, but worth considering nonetheless. So I think really exploring the variety of proof signals that you can gather and the ways that you can use them throughout your homepage, in addition to that logo strip, is a really useful way to build trust, credibility, and signal the value to the buyer. And if you do that, you'll be able to move on, I suppose, to point number 3, which is differentiation, or how it works. So one of the things we want to typically avoid with our homepage is duplicating content that naturally lives elsewhere. So we don't want to repeat or rehash product features or the tour or the detailed content about how a specific part of our offering or our platform works. We don't want to duplicate that whole content, but it's really important on the homepage to create a sense of differentiation between what you offer and either the status quo or the other likely solutions that a buyer is considering. Now, if you can get differentiation into the value proposition, that's no bad thing, I don't think. Get it across quickly, clearly, and concisely, and you'll win more attention and you'll create more conversions. But when it comes to populating the homepage with content, it can be a really good idea to think about how can I communicate, what's different about the way we solve the problem compared to competing solutions or doing nothing. And so that may come across in the form of benefits or features supported with, illustrations and images or screenshots or photos. But I think it's really important to look at it through the lens of differentiation and creating separation between you and the other solutions. One way that I think is underutilized to do this is to actually expose how your product, service, or solution does what it does. I can think of quite a few times when visited a website and found the value proposition very compelling, but because of some familiarity with the challenge that's involved, so that needs to be overcome, or the technologies that are part of the sort of area, you find yourself wondering exactly how does solution X achieve this great benefit that they're saying they offer. And so for some businesses, I think it could be really valuable to lay out how you perform or accomplish what you say you do, and answer the key questions that buyers might have about the reality of using your platform. If I think about how this might work in some of the situations I've encountered, it might be about how you gain access to the data that you're using and you claim to be able to analyze. Or if you do something that no one else can, it's worth exposing to some degree, how you've made it possible with what innovation or with what process you can do what you say you do. And I think for a lot of businesses, that would be a great way to answer key questions that the buyers have that would increase the trust, increase the credibility, and get more of them to the bottom of the funnel for that high intent conversion. For services businesses and some others, it can be interesting to expose the process that you go through to either work with a client or achieve the results that you do, because again, it increases the transparency and it increases the trust, and buyers are looking to get all the information they seek in a self-serve manner before speaking to sales. So showing them the process that you're going to take them through is a very powerful way to build that trust, build that credibility, and create some unique content for your homepage that serves the purpose of generating that increased conversion rate. So that's a really good way to do it. And the fourth key thing that your B2B website homepage needs is, of course, calls to action, probably plural. And these are a really interesting area of UX and content and design. And some things will always, it appears, work better than other things. So as a general rule, when it comes to CTA performance, call to action performance, we found that two levers are the best to pull for driving both the quantity and the quality. Because of course, if you massively ramp up quantity, but quality drops through the floor, you're going to be wasting an awful lot of valuable time, potentially rep time or resource time, on poor fit leads that are unlikely to buy. Now, if you ratchet up quality all the way, you may severely impact your quantity. So, no good having the highest stringent standards for lead generation if none come through at all, right? So this is a balancing act, but we found that specificity and authenticity are drivers of both quality and quantity when it comes to calls to action. So by specificity or authenticity, we mean be clear about what a CTA offers, come clean about what's behind it, what the next step is, and follow through on that promise. So for example, we've talked in other content situations about how a trial is usually more attractive than a demo, unless it's actually a demo that you have to offer, but the button that you put forward says try it now. That lack of authenticity from CTA to landing page or form, really detrimental to the user experience. In terms of specificity, get started, which is a fairly popular way of trying to sort of remove some of, I think, the sort of hard-nosed nature of some calls to action, like, talk to sales, which is actually a very good call to action. Get started is a really soft way of doing it, but it lacks any specificity. And the problem with that is that it can fit any situation or in any use case, meaning it kind of fits none. And buyers are really thrown through a loop with get started CTAs. Research was done, that proved this fact. And I think, having seen some case studies on the subject, the get started approach can increase quantity. A lot of people will click on that, but so many will be expecting something other than what's offered that I think quality and the follow through, the conversion rate will drop. So specificity, authenticity, really powerful. Another example, we recently worked with a customer to change contact us, very vague, very meaningless, not very focused on mutual benefit, creating pipeline, change that to talk to sales, and saw an immediate increase in both quantity and quality of the conversions that came through that channel. So they really are worth pushing to get them more specific and more truthful, basically. Now, in terms of where to put them, a lot of people will have calls to action in their navigation header, the very top of the page, which in many cases will be either sticky or will reappear on a scroll upwards again. And this is a really good place for them. Buyers expect them there. It's familiar, it's intuitive, there's room, free from clutter and distractions. They really are good places to put those CTAs. Again, it's important to pick the CTA that offers the most mutual benefit that you have available to your buyer. So it's that, take a trial or book a demo. It might be necessary to put it alongside a secondary CTA, and that might be a lower order of lead generation CTA, so like talk to sales, for example, or it might be a customer facing CTA like login, and that's not a problem either. It's just really important here and everywhere to use styling to distinguish the primary CTA that you want new visitors to take to generate pipeline from the secondary CTA that is either less important in terms of pipeline generation, or that existing customers will know to look for, and it doesn't need to stand out as much in order to serve its purpose. So those header CTAs are, essentially no bad idea, no bad thing. In the hero section, there's an interesting conundrum, which is, do we put a CTA or multiple CTAs there? And the challenge that we face is that, having just read the value proposition, in most cases, logic says a new visitor probably isn't ready to jump to the bottom of the funnel, except some probably are. So the question becomes, do you put signposts and CTAs and signals here that take people deeper into your site, or do you put CTAs here that are bottom of the funnel? Or do you put no CTAs at all? Now, I don't have a concrete answer to this one. There hasn't been a heap of large volume study done on it. One study that I did come across today actually found that on a particular website, there was a 31% higher conversion rate on the site overall when there were no CTA buttons in the hero section compared to when there were hero CTA buttons in the hero section. So it was a really interesting find. Plan to do some more testing on this myself. The likelihood is, I suspect, that those CTAs will always get significantly less attention and less click-through rate than CTAs in the header or further down the page or in the footer section, because buyers simply aren't in the mind to engage in that moment in that section. But it's a really interesting area where I think each business should test. And the 3 tests to do are probably no CTAs there at all, measure the conversion rate, measure the click-through rate on the homepage, measure the conversion rate of the site overall. CTAs that lead them to other key content, so like the product tour or the pricing page or other content that's kind of critical to the purchase in most cases, really good thing to test, although they should be able to find those pages and that content by other means, of course. Or, elevate them up to that big bottom of the funnel CTA, which is take a trial, book a demo, talk to sales, and see what impact that has on your conversion rate. As I said, many things in website design, no matter how appealing they are to us, don't drive measurable, attractive increases or decreases in the performance. So it may be neither here nor there, but by all means test and let us know what you find. We'll do the same when we can do that. Then I think we've got to think about CTAs throughout the rest of the page, which is probably going to be about signposting people to the next logical step. So when you've got differentiation, which is largely going to be related to the problem solved or the features or benefits of the product, you're going to most likely want to signpost people to pages within the site that are more detailed on that subject, so products and so on. When you get down to the bottom of your homepage, what we've seen is it's very common for businesses to put before the footer, a nice full width CTA. Commonly, they're either promoting a piece of content, a resource like an ebook or a guide or a white paper, or simply just a big, very, very clear call to convert, go contact us. Universally, we've seen that those sections, those banners, do very little at all. They don't get clicked. Visitors to homepages are not typically looking to find ebooks and guides. So when they promote content, that usually just doesn't do anything for performance or conversion. It's ignored for the most part. Heat mapping can help you confirm if that's happening on your site, as can measuring click-through rate to the next page and so on. And similarly, when you put forward that big, convert here proposition, as often as not, buyers are inclined to go around it. You've got to remember that buyers want to be in control of the purchase process. They want to be in charge of what happens. And as a result, a lot of the things that we do to try to channel them a certain way, they resist. They go their own way. Those header CTAs, which they feel are universal and intuitive, they take and they accept, and they will click on footer links to a variety of things. But so often they'll click over that, they'll skip over that CTA section on your homepage. So I'm in favor of leaving those out altogether and improving and optimizing the other calls to action, as well as the other sections of your homepage we've discussed today, so that you're generating the highest level of conversions that you can with the key content that buyers need. So if you refine those 4 sections of your website homepage, your value proposition, how clearly and concisely it's communicated, how it's presented in an acceptable way to the buyer, so that the blink test is a success. You communicate the proof and the evidence that you have, that you're trusted and you're credible, that you differentiate yourselves from the competitors and from the do nothing status quo, alternative, and you provide specific and authentic calls to action in logical places and ways that are proven to convert, then you've got a great homepage for your B2B business that will set the visitor up to have a productive visit, to stay, to engage, and to convert. And this will usually correlate with an increase in the high intent inquiries that you receive, that we typically call MQLs, not top of the funnel leads that download ebooks or are scored, people who are ready to talk to sales or ready to experience the product, and an increase in the pipeline that's generated too. And those core principles, are rooted in buyer preferences today, user experience testing, and they've been tried and tested over and over again. So it's not that they are guaranteed to succeed, but they're the closest thing to it. So please go forward, review your home pages for those factors, improve and optimize if you can, and enjoy reaping the rewards. And of course, let us know how you get on. I'll wrap up there. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode of Demand Decoded. Be sure to follow the Blend LinkedIn page to join our future live events. And you can watch this and previous episodes of Demand Decoded on our YouTube channel, or you can listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Demand Decoded. Thank you very much for tuning in, and see you next time.